Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Ask the Arborist. I want to thank you guys for being here with us today. And I also want to take the time to just go over a few things before we get started today. Start with our slides. They always take a minute to load. There we go. I always like to start with the Trees Atlanta mission, just in case anybody here is unfamiliar with it. Trees Atlanta's mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forest by planning, conserving, and educating. Let's see. Again, just welcome. This is an interactive learning event, so we have some pre-submitted questions that we'll ask first, but then also you should feel free to use the Q&A or the chat button throughout the event in case anything pops into your mind that you want to have answered. We'd be happy to do that as long as we have time. We also just want to know how we can improve, always looking for feedback. So please, leave us any feedback that can enhance your experience or anything you think that we could add. You'll get a survey email that, will be a platform for you to give us feedback and everything like that. These are all of our social media platforms. It is Trees Atlanta on Facebook, Instagram, and then Twitter as well. And then you can also sign up for our newsletter to learn more about us and our upcoming events and any opportunities to get involved with us. And then without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Jason Ernest. He's the Municipal Arborist for the City of Atlanta Department of Parks and Recreation. He's an ISA Certified Arborist. He has a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from the University of Georgia, and he's also a Green Shirt volunteer for Trees Atlanta. And then we also have Alex Beasley. He is the Associate Director of Donor Relations here at Trees Atlanta. He's an ISA Certified Arborist, and then he also has a Bachelor of Landscape and Architecture from the University of Georgia. So welcome, you two. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn the floor over to you now if you want to introduce yourselves.
Jason, go.
Afternoon, everybody. I think that's a pretty succinct, that's all you need to know about me right there on the page. I've been with the city, I've been an arborist for about 10 years now, and I've been with the city, I think, close to 7 years in this position. So ready to answer some questions.
As for me, you can see I'm now a fundraiser, but my main passion lies in arboriculture. I love trees. I love tree selection. I ran the Neighborhoods program for 3.5 or 4 seasons, but have worked with trees, planting trees for 7 or 8. I teach pruning here. And yeah, I just, trees excite me. I like them very much. So look forward to answering your questions. Jason and I actually graduated together. And he would come and volunteer. So he's planted many trees with us in the past.
Awesome. And like I said, we're so happy that you guys are here taking the time to answer these questions for us. So I think I'm just going to get right into it. The first question we have says, do you have a recommendation for selecting a native tree that would do well on a fairly steep hill under the canopy of 2 tall pines? All leaves or flowering would both work, but not fruiting as it's difficult to reach on the hill. It's very near home power lines, so something that stays more compact would be ideal to keep it from being massacred by the power company in the future. It's to be used to fill some greenery gaps between 2 properties, but it does not need to be an evergreen. As it grows larger or wider, it will probably be able to get out of the shadow of the pines and into some good light on one side over a patch of lawn at the bottom of the hill, all weeds and mud as the basin floods when it rains a lot.
Wow. Okay. So let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
So trees are classified in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways that we classify trees is by their size. I'm going to pull up the City of Atlanta tree planting guidelines here in a little bit, which is a pretty good list of native and commonly available trees that are classified by size. So the three sizes are overstory, mid canopy, and understory or ornamental trees. And that's basically big, medium, and large. And we'll go over kind of the exact sizes of those trees, or how those trees are classified in a little bit. Any understory tree is going to work in that location. The problem is going to be shade tolerance, and that's another subject that we need to talk about. So shade, the important thing to remember there is tolerance. Some trees will tolerate shade, but that doesn't mean they're actually going to do well. Some do better than others. Most of these ornamental trees, or trees that are considered understory trees, are shade tolerant because they are under the canopy. So again, we can pull up a list of those here in a minute, but these, the thing with this list that we're going to pull up here is that you're going to be hemmed in by what's available in the nursery trade at the time that you're ready to plant. And your best bet for selection is to take this list or take a similar list with you to the nursery and say, do you have any of these, or do you have anything similar? Describe your situation to the nurseryman, and they can usually give you a pretty accurate and good handful of trees that will work in the situation that you're looking on or looking to plan on. Hillsides are always going to be hard, and that requires a little bit different type of installation than on flat ground. And we can talk about that too, maybe if we want to get into that.
I'm going to nerd out and give just some name drops here of what I think might be appropriate for that space. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is one of our natives, which has a lot of different cultivars that are really beautiful. You guys are probably all familiar with redbud. They do actually need well-drained soil, so that slope works well. Some of the better, stronger cultivars are Merlot, which is always purple all the time. I can't quite suggest the Rising Sun. It's a little bit too weedy and gets gangly, but under the proper conditions, maybe full shade, it might be able to tolerate it a little bit better and not get overgrown. Or just the straight up native Cercis canadensis. I think Jason would agree that dogwoods are pretty quickly going out of our hardiness zone. If you insist on planting a flowering dogwood, I would go with smaller rather than larger. The smaller you can transplant a root ball, maybe 3 gallon, maybe 7 gallon. The higher likelihood that you're going to have it survive. And another great alternative to that is Halesia tetraptera, which is double wing silver bell. That's triple wing silver bell actually, but Diptera or Tetraptera, they're pretty tough. They can tolerate shade well. And then just one more name drop. It's not going to fruit as often since it's in heavy shade, but Amelanchier arborea, which is serviceberry, is a really nice understory ornamental that has some really great fall color. But use Jason's and the city of Atlanta's understory, overstory, just so you know. And really, I can't encourage this enough. Do your own research. Those tags are not always right. If you go to Pike Nursery or Lowe's, God forbid, those are not always accurate. I've seen them say that dogwoods are full sun. We all know that that's absolutely not true. So do your research. I think Dr. Michael Durr is a great resource. University of Georgia Extension Services have some great resources, as do the city of Atlanta. And call Trees Atlanta, call Jason. We'll be happy to help you, consult on the correct species.
I'll just add one last thing before we move on. The Georgia Power arborists and rights of way managers would kill me if they knew that I was going to say this, but you're not necessarily limited to understory or decorative trees under power lines. You can probably get away with some mid canopy trees that are on the lower end of their height range. And, with some judicious pruning, you can train them up so that they're not going to be a problem. And that really opens up what you're allowed to, or, what's available to you.
All right. Awesome. The next one talks also about shade tolerance. It says, are there any fruit trees that are relatively shade tolerant? Their location is a wooded backyard with little undergrowth and many mature pines, oaks, and maples. However, recently neighbors have cut down a large swath of trees, and there's an area near the back fence where there's direct sunlight for several hours every day in the summer. It's still shady much of the time. My friend would love to add a fruit tree there, especially native, but isn't sure the best varieties. He'd like to consider a few different options if possible.
Jason, I'll start this one off. That's okay. I think the number one thing that screams to me right now is a definitely underutilized, which is pawpaw, Asimina triloba. Again, lots of cultivars, some that are more shade tolerant, some that are more of that fringy woods tolerance. But in order for you to really get productive fruiting, two suggestions: obviously give it as much sun as you can possibly get, and also buy a book on how to prune fruit trees, because it is a very different set of tactics in order to be able to utilize your sun. That's spoliating it along the southern or western facing, keeping it low so that you can actually harvest it. But you know, it's a great tree for pollinators, birds, and if you like kind of a custardy, banana-y, fleshy fruit, pawpaw is great. We do have a native persimmon, and we do have service berries and plums, but most of those are going to be a little bit more prolific in full sun. Jason.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you know, again, shade tolerance, you have to remember that it's tolerating the shade. It's not thriving in shade. And I think, Alex, you'll correct me if this is right or wrong, but I think shade tolerance is at least 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight, right? So a couple of hours isn't going to cut it. And again, just to reiterate what Alex said, fruit trees require some specialty pruning to really get them to produce. So you need to keep that in mind too.
Alrighty, this next one is looking for recommendations on good dwarf shade trees for full sun near power lines. So similar to.
I think we kind of covered that, and you know, again, it's there's a bunch of stuff out there. We'll provide this list here in a minute, but that the list is not exhaustive, obviously, and anything in the understory category will work. And that's kind of the key thing to remember. You can go to the nursery, even if you don't have this list, tell them you want a understory or decorative tree that you're going to plant under some power lines, and they'll be able to give you quite a few choices to choose from.
Yeah. Whenever we've kind of run into these situations, especially with Jason's aforementioned Georgia Power, they're the most stringent. They have their job. Municipal arborists are trying to keep the power on for you guys, so that they're very strict. So bear that in mind the next time they come. But they want to know if we are going to be planting something, they want to know that a reputable source has said that is not going to exceed a certain limit, and that reputable source is always Dr. Michael Durr. He is an ex-professor at the University of Illinois and the University of Georgia, and he is probably, Jason, unless you can think of anybody else, he's the best arboricultural, at least in terms of introducing trees and knowing their habits of anybody. So I forget what the newest encyclopedia is called, but it's an orange book. Dr. Michael Durr. It's going to be expensive. It'll probably be about $100, $120, because it's more of a textbook-based non-picture. But it is every tree in the east and southeast, and really gives you insight into what cultivars are going to work better. Because I think Jason kind of mentions this. Well, you know, like just because we're used to a bald cypress or a sweet bay magnolia, oh, that's a mid canopy tree. There are cultivars that they bred to be smaller. So get creative, do your research. I think, you know, for example, with a sweet bay magnolia, I think one called Henry Hicks is actually allowable to be planted under power lines because it's under 25 feet. But when it comes to power lines, really be aware that the transmission power lines are different than the telecommunications power lines. They're not supposed to prune for the telecommunications power lines. Those have the black coatings on them. But when it comes to the 60-foot transmission power lines that usually have those clear cut easements, they're extremely strict about them. And you should just grow a vegetable garden there.
So, and just for people's information, if you don't already know this, the power lines are generally at the top of the pole. So those thicker lines that are lower on the pole are usually your communication utilities, and the power lines are usually up at the top. And for your standard distribution lines that run up and down the street like that, they have a 15-foot easement, and they are allowed to prune that 15-foot easement regardless of what industry standards are for pruning. So they're going to maintain that halo. One thing that I will say is that if they come up to a tree that's already been pruned and looks pretty close to the 15-foot, they'll move on. So if you have a tree that you really care about and you want it pruned the way that you want it pruned, you should do that before the next Georgia Power pruning cycle, because they will butcher it if they can.
Alrighty. The next question says, what fruit trees are also ornamental, and they want to know how to design the layout. And they have the same question for native trees.
Say that question again.
What fruit trees are also ornamental, and then they want to know how to design the layout.
So I think that most fruit trees are going to fall into that ornamental category. They're generally small trees. Peaches, pears, apples, all the standard type of fruit trees. If you're talking about trees, if you're going to include nut-bearing trees like all the hickories and pecans and those type of stuff, those will get huge. But most fruit trees, I think, fall under the that ornamental category. I saw a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time asking about design and layout. That's going to be hard to do in using this forum, because any landscape design is going to be dependent on context and intent, and we don't have that in this case. And even if we did, really it's better left to somebody who can actually come to the site and take all those things into consideration that are important for design considerations, like topography, orientation to the sun, the soil conditions, and so on, in addition to the context and intent that I mentioned earlier. So we can talk a little bit generally about tree spacing. That's probably the most, that's the only thing that we're really going to be able to say here. And we'll, again, when we pull up the sheet, you'll see this, but there are some sort of industry standards for how to space trees so that they don't suppress each other. And I, right off the top of my head, this is not going to be completely accurate, but understory trees need to be 15 feet apart. Mid-story trees need to be 25 feet apart, and overstories need to be at least 35 feet apart. So those are guidelines. You can obviously, that's not, it doesn't have to be exact to the inch, but the Arborist division mentions that in their tree planting guideline, because they don't want builders and developers squeezing trees into the back corner of a property to meet their recompense and replanting requirements. But those distances will allow those different sizes of trees to flourish if planted in that fashion.
I am not going to correct one thing that Jason just said. Everything he said is accurate, but I just can't stress enough doing your research, knowing what not only the height of a tree is going to be, but the spread, and just having an idea, even if you're going to hire a landscape architect or a landscape designer, which Jason encouraged you to do, which I heavily encourage you to do, do your research as to what exactly you want. Are you going to be harvesting these? Maybe if you are going to be harvesting these, you're going to want to learn to prune them first. The way that you prune them might actually affect what your spacing is going to be. If you have a limited amount of sun, you're going to want to, again, the aforementioned kind of espalier along the sun, just so your entire tree and all your branches are getting sun throughout the day, thus maximizing your production. Just really, I'm an arborist, I'm a landscape architect, but I have a garden out there where I've made a lot of mistakes just because I got kind of ants in my pants when I first moved into this house. And it's really not what you want to do. This is a long-term investment, and you don't want to have to cut down or move trees after X number of years. So, get with a professional, but also do your due diligence in not only jumping the gun, but just get creative. Don't just because the next door neighbor has some apple trees. I highly suggest don't plant apple trees, by the way. They get tons of fungus, but there's so many exciting things happening in arboriculture, and why not have your garden be not only unique, but maximize the benefits to birds and pollinators and things like that, in addition to your kind of harvest or haul. So that's my soapbox for the day. Sorry.
Alrighty, this next question says they need a recommendation for a small tree without extensive roots. They're planting near their home. They already have basement water issues and don't want more.
Say it, Jason. Say it. Say it.
Well, I don't know that there's any homes in the city of Atlanta that don't have water issues in their basements. We average close to 4 feet of rain here a year, and every place I've ever lived has had some water intrusion issues. But I think there's a widely held misconception that tree roots are damaging home foundations on a widespread basis. It's not true. They can, but it's exceedingly rare. And generally what we see is it's a large tree that's grown next to a house for an extended period of time and has a huge root system and a huge soil volume that might be uphill from a home, and all that starts pressing down on the foundation. When fleshy roots encounter concrete masonry units, they generally go in a different direction. Some of the ones that are that can cause damage are trees like southern magnolias that have huge, big, these huge root masses. But any small tree is going to have a relatively small root system. The smaller the tree, the smaller the root system. The larger the tree, the larger the root system. So anything under that ornamental understory decorative category would probably work. And I honestly wouldn't worry too much about tree roots damaging foundations because it just doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah, and just as a point of reference, anything that Trees Atlanta plants in those small little verges, that usually means that you don't have a shallow buttressing root system. Jason mentioned southern magnolia, but the maples are notorious for buckling sidewalks and potentially foundations and things like that. But crepe myrtle, red maple, really any understory tree, your roots are going to match your critical roots are going to match the drip zone where water falls from your tree, one for one. So keep it small, try and keep it away from the foundation of your house. But I think Jason hopefully put your mind at ease a little bit.
Alrighty, this next one says, I have a 40 to 50 foot pecan tree near my back door that has large branded falling. I would like to cut it down. What type of permit do I need?
I think that was a little bit of a typo. I think they meant some branches falling. So branches are going to fall out of trees. It just happens. It's not necessarily an indication that there's anything wrong with the tree. I can understand when you have a pecan tree. Pecan trees are sort of notorious for shedding lots of stuff, including branches and shell husks and leaves and everything else. They're just a big messy tree. Like I said, it's not necessarily an indication that there's anything wrong with it. And something's going to have to be wrong with it for you to get a permit to remove it. The removal permit for trees in Atlanta is called the Dead, Dying, and Hazardous Removal Permit. And you simply submit that application to the City of Atlanta Arborist Division. The field arborist who's assigned to your zip code will come out and conduct that inspection. And if there is something wrong with it, they'll issue the permit for removal. If it's just dropping limbs and branches and there's really nothing else wrong with it, you're probably going to have a tough time getting a permit to remove it. But you do not need a permit to prune trees. And trees like pecans, pines, a lot of those trees sort of self-prune, for lack of a better word, as they get bigger, and they just need kind of constant attention, unfortunately.
Alrighty, this next one says, I planted Jane Magnolia last fall. This year I saw a couple of new shoots and leaves, but unfortunately rabbits ate them all, leaving behind only chewed bark. Will my magnolia recover? It's been 2 months. I haven't seen any new growth or leaves.
I wonder if the person that is on who posed that question, is there no new growth in the entirety of the tree or just in those new shoots? And while that person is typing, hopefully, a way to tell if there are shoots or branches or whatever, a way to tell that they're alive before you go through the trouble or whatever of pruning it is you can always do a little scratch test with your finger or a knife and just see if it's at a minimum yellow. What you're looking for though is like a vibrant green. If it's not, if it's brown, or if it just really scrapes off in mass, that does mean that there's just dead, and it's worth pruning back. And when you are pruning back, always be conservative, because you never know which node. By node, I mean like a potential bud, a potential fruit, a potential leaf is active, because you can scratch on the farthest side of a branch and then say, okay, this one's dead, and then cut it back to the base, and then realize that you cut green active shoots. So just be conservative. You can't press rewind when you're pruning, but I don't know if that person is going to end up typing that, but just do the scratch test. If those shoots aren't going to make it, it kind of is what it is. But if the entirety of the tree hasn't shot any growth out, I would say it is bye-bye.
All right.
Can't answer any better than that.
I don't see anything in the chat from that person, but I'll keep looking, and then we'll circle back to it if anything comes up. The next one says, what are some fast-growing trees for privacy fences?
Jace, you want to start?
Well, most fast growing, evergreens are going to be the most fast growing, and those are generally what's used for a privacy fence. And there are some suggestions on the the City of Atlanta's tree planting guidelines that we'll jump into, but no Leland cypresses, please.
Don't
I think
do
everybody.
arborvitae. Do not do arborvitae, y'all.
Those are both species that are very problematic for a host of different reasons. Cryptomeria seems to be the one that everybody has switched to these days, but there are quite a lot of varieties out there. None of these, and most of these, are not going to be natives. You can also use pine tree varieties as well, some of the smaller growing pine tree varieties to create a screen. But your best bet, again, is to try and take a list to a nursery or several nurseries and see what they've got and see what's available to you, and see if they can make any suggestions for you at the time.
And there seemed to be an abundance of fruit tree questions. I think my go-to would always be Eastern red cedar, but bear in mind that if you are having the two of those on the same piece of property or nearby to your orchard or whatever, Eastern red cedar does cause cedar apple rust, so it does not play well with others oftentimes. So just bear that in mind if the two are going to be coalesced on a single property. Yeah.
Alrighty, I'm going to move on. We've gotten a few Q&A questions, so I'm going to move over there. The first one says, recommend replacement for 14 Bradford pears along driveway, full sun, fast growing.
So those trees were most certainly planted too close together, and they were all crammed in there. And you don't want to make that mistake again. And just generally speaking, you want something if you're looking for something of the same sort of size at maturity, you're looking for understory and mid canopy trees, and you're looking at 15 to 25 foot spacing. So anything in the list that we're going to flash up and make available later will work. Alex is much more in tune with what's available and species names, and works much more closely with that. So I'll let him make specific suggestions if he wants.
I think Jason and I would probably both agree that a monoculture kind of gives an experience as you go down a driveway. I don't know if this is like a palatial driveway or a normal driveway, but I think what they were going for with the Bradford pears was kind of that experience of same bloom time, same fall color. So I would encourage that, maybe one species on one side, one on the other, but I think we all know that the kind of experience we can have when it's all the same type. But use others throughout your yard. That is very important. But, what I was going to add is just make sure that those stumps have had the opportunity to rot out, or plant them a little bit further from the epicenter of where those past trees were. So definitely get them ground, and then maybe wait a season or two before you plant atop them, or you're going to need some soil to add to it, because that does begin to degrade and actually become soil instead of sawdust, and your trees will sink. Trees that are planted too low do not do well. But that's a pretty open-ended question. Just see really what you like, and just making sure you're not planting things that are going to buttress your driveway in the future. And yeah, just have fun with it.
All righty, the next one says, what is the best way and best time of year to prune brown turkey fig trees? I planted 2 of them in the same area about 3 years ago, and they are suddenly becoming enormous and crowding out my small peonies.
Well, there's always, the best time to prune is always going to be in the winter. That's for a number of reasons, but the main reason is you can see the form much better, and you're not having to deal with the load or the weight of the leaves. So you have a really clear picture of what needs to be done. Again, you're going to need to do your research on fruiting trees, and how to prune them for maximization of your harvest. Usually that's keeping them low, keeping them, splayed like a fan. But people often don't realize when they plant a fig, it's not a tree. It is a bush that will take over. It's kind of similar to a southern magnolia. And even if you cut it down or it dies back due to frost, it will come back. So get it while you still can before you need to get on ladders and it becomes dangerous. But always prune in the winter if you can. You will, however, notice that we at Trees Atlanta prune in the summer. That is out of necessity, as most of our neighborhoods group is busy planting, 8,000 trees in the winter. It's also the time that you plant trees. So you can get away with pruning right now, but there's, in addition to having the extra burden of the leaves and things like that, there's pathogens, there's humidity. It's just opening up a vector for disease when you're planting with everything that's out in the summer and humidity and things like that. So.
Was that a humble brag? I heard 8,000 trees. They just dropped that like it was nobody's business.
Yeah, no big deal. It's more like 7,600, but I don't plant them, so it was not a brag. I sit in another.
I'll just add to that figs. Alex said it, but you can hard prune them just like you can with maybe not as much as crepe myrtles and magnolias, but they will tolerate pretty hard pruning at any time.
All right, we have one more in the Q&A. It's similar to what we've been covering. The only thing that this one has is the zone that it's in. So maybe there would be some differences there. It says, please recommend fast growing shade trees for full sun, zone 7B.
Fast growing shade trees for full sun. I'll throw a couple out, Jace, if you want to throw a couple out after. I think my go-to for fast growing shade giving trees is probably tulip poplar. This is more mid-story, but the red maple, I hate to say it, is super, super fast. Tulip poplar, red maple, cherry bark oak is very fast. Now, Jason, I'll think some more here in a second too.
Well, I was going to say tulip poplar. That's probably one of the fastest growing hardwoods that I know of. Those things do grow like crazy given the right growing conditions. But again, a lot of these species specific questions are going to have to be addressed at the time that you actually purchase your tree, because the nursery trade is, the nurserymen it's just like any other business. They're trying to look ahead 3, 4, 5 years to what they think people are going to want. So while we've got this beautiful list of all these native trees and trees that do well in our area, a bunch of these aren't going to be available when you're ready to do your planting. So you're going to have to do, like Alex said, research is important. One of the things that we hammer home with people is right tree, right place. And despite the fact that we preach it constantly from every possible venue, mistakes still get made constantly in regards to species and location. So, but if you've got the list with you, the person, a good nursery person will be able to give you some alternatives to what you're asking for if they don't have exactly what you're asking for.
And another one that just came to mind is if you can handle the gumballs, a gumball tree. Why can't I think of the actual name of that, Jason?
Sweet gum.
Yeah, sweet gum. They do, and I say if you can handle the fruit, because it is a really great. It's not only fast and has beautiful fall color, but it's great for birds. It's a roosting tree, but they do come with fruitless cultivars. One is called Rotunda loba, so you get all of the beauty and the fast growing and all that great stuff without the actual fruit. But yeah, I would encourage you to not only use Jason's stuff as a resource, but the University of Georgia Extension does have they're kind of old documents, but they'll tell you exactly what grows in these certain zones from Augusta down to Savannah, and how fast it'll grow, how big it'll get, things like that. There's just resources everywhere. You just, got to be willing to use them. But again, just don't always trust those tags. Go to a reputable source who is not trying to make money off of it.
Alrighty. Jason, if you want to pull up what you wanted to share,
Sure.
I think if you guys have any other questions that you want answered, feel free to drop in the Q&A, and we'll get those answered for you.
So there it is, I think. Is everyone, no, you are seeing that?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just minimize this. This is the City of Atlanta's tree planting list. You all can sort of read through this at your leisure. This is available on the City of Atlanta's Arborist website. And if you just Google City of Atlanta Arborist Division, after all the ads, it's the first thing that'll come up. Over to the left is a heading that says forms and documents. And there's a bunch of stuff in there that can be useful for you, but there are standard tree planting details that kind of give you a good idea about how to actually plant a tree, what that actually looks like, and among other things. But this list is there. So as you can see here, it's grouped by size. So you've got your overstory trees. The trees in the selections in bold are native. Your mid-story trees, and again, it goes into what that means. Mid canopy trees typically reach a diameter of this. The height is generally this, and again, the natives are in bold. On down to your understory, and then it gives you a couple of recommendations for some specific location. Evergreen screening trees, which I think we had a question on. Some columnar trees, which can be really useful for certain locations, and stuff that tolerates wet soil. Parking lots, blah blah blah. Mid-story, you can read all that yourself. And again, this document is available on the City of Atlanta's website. So,
looks like we just got another question. This one says, is there a list of Beltline plants and trees?
Email alex@treesatlanta.org with that question. I don't know if there is a public facing list, but I can probably get access to that GIS data. If not, there should be. How about that? That's the answer. But if you go along the East Side Trail, you can actually, I think all of them, as you might be able to speak to this, have granite markers that denote the species. There are collections. There's the magnolia collection. There's the longleaf pine collection. There's the 33 oaks collection. So if you need to know today, it's not raining, go out and check it out. But I might be able to wrangle that from our program staff.
Alrighty, let's see. I know we talked a little bit beforehand about if we had some extra time, if we wanted to discuss like storm damage related topics, because I know we've had a lot of storms and stuff recently, if that would be something we would want to cover in this, just for anybody who that would apply to.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me give you, just for anybody who's curious. So for those of you who might not be as familiar with the ordinances we are, the City of Atlanta Tree Protection Ordinance covers both public and private property. And because of that, it's confusingly administered by two separate agencies. The Arborist Division is the agency that has purview over private property trees and administers the ordinance on private property. And the Parks Department, who I work for, administers the ordinance on public property. So that's trees in the right of way, trees at schools, trees on any City of Atlanta property. Most of them are in the right of way. That's where we have most of our trees. We have close to 1,800 miles of linear right of way. That's a lot of trees. And the process for having those inspected and having those possibly pruned or removed is a little bit different than what you might do with the arborist division. So if you have a tree on private property that needs to be removed, you would submit that DDH application to the arborist division. If you have a tree in front of your house or trees in front of your house that are in the right of way, you need to submit a tree inspection request to Parks Customer Service or through 311. That will, then it's a two-step process. I will get assigned a work order to come inspect that tree. And if anything needs to be done with it, then the City of Atlanta Forestry Division will come out there and remove it or prune it. Both of those steps have a 45 business day service level agreement, meaning that we have 45 business days to complete those inspection types. Never quite takes me that long, but that's the longest that you can expect between the time you submit and the time the tree is removed. Private citizens or property owners can prune and remove trees in the right of way. You just need a permit from me. And again, you would just submit a tree inspection request with a note in there saying that if the tree does need to be pruned or removed, you would be willing to do it. I'm not suggesting that you should. It's just that a lot of people don't know they have that option. They don't like the 45 business day timeline, which can honestly extend well beyond that for forestry operations. But so just know that. So in terms of what we do for storm damage and cleanup, that is all on the City of Atlanta. The Department of Public Works and the Department of Parks will generally work together to clear storm damage. All those requests need to go either through 911 or 311.
All righty, thanks, Jason. If anybody has any other questions, I think we've been through all the live ones and all the ones we had submitted beforehand. Let's see. And thank you, Alex, for being active in the chat, dropping the recommendations and the names. That's been great. But if that is,
Bye.
I'll be over. I'll be over in a minute. I'll be over in a minute for lunch, Alex.
Okay.
All righty. So yeah, I think we're good. I think we answered everybody's questions. Hopefully you guys got some great information out of this. This recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. You guys will also receive a link to it via email afterwards. So feel free to go back to that to get some of that information again if you need to go back to any certain question. But yeah, I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to be here today. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Jason. Hopefully everyone got some great information out of this. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.